This is Rob Lucci. His hobbies include carpentry, knitting, force-feeding magical fruits to co-workers, and of course, vicious kill murdering. And Mr. Rob Lucci also happens to be one of the premier villains of the One Piece. But how premier do you ask him is? Maybe? Well, we're gonna find out. Because we are on a mission to rank every major antagonist in the most comprehensive and exhaustive way possible, video by video, this time featuring the literal cat in the hat, Rob Lucci. So here's a fun thing. Rob Lucci is, I think, the only primary antagonist we're going to examine who was at one point a Straw Hat candidate. The opening of Water 7 was that the Going Merry needed to be repaired and that the Straw Hats needed a shipwright. So we go to Water 7. We meet a bunch of ship make work people, and we know that one of them is going to be our next crew member, and Mr. Rob Lucci at the time was on that list. We didn't know at the time that he was a secret agent planted by the world government to find some drawings of a very big boat on paper stored within a cyborg. No, Oda very deliberately deceived us when it comes to this man. The first panel of Rob Lucci in the series is without question the single most unremarkable first panel of any primary antagonist in One Piece. It is simply this tiny sliver of Rob Lucci who looks so purposely unremarkable, sandwiched between two other GLR carpenters working away. The first time you see Lucci, you don't even see Lucci. It's like reading a story by a magician. Everything needed for the trick is right there in plain sight, but the author is able to command your attention so powerfully that you don't even see it. Even in Lucci's first full body panel, yes, he clearly stands out in retrospect because we know who he is, but at the time, the attention primarily goes to Paulie, because he has a more intricate, how shall we say, main character design, with assorted bright colors as opposed to the rest of GLR, and Paulie's color scheme was very deliberately designed by Oda, because in that very same chapter, Luffy had previously declared his intention to acquire a shipwright, and then drew a masterwork depicting Frankie, but we didn't know that at the time. All we knew is that Luffy wanted someone vaguely blue, and Paulie's primary color scheme was also vaguely blue. There are things, ever so many teeny tiny things that Oda implemented in order to get the heat off of Lucci, because it's a very tricky thing to balance. Oda couldn't make Lucci too obscure or else the betrayal and revelation wouldn't be satisfying. No great mystery ends with the conclusion that it was the guy in the background of page 5 in chapter 323. So the real challenge here was to make Lucci both blend in and stand out. And Oda did this through the classic shonen device of quirk typecasting. In a lot of shonen series, authors develop one-trick characters who have an extremely odd quirk, like say Ghosh from Black Clover, whose only real characteristic is his obsession with his sister, or Lance from Marshall, who's obsessed with his sister, or Yuri from Spy Family, who's obsessed with his sister. Other character quirks are available, it doesn't always have to be mild incest, and Rob Lucci is a great example of this. Oda gave him the very bold quirk of ventriloquism via pigeon, which is so ridiculous that it disarms readers and viewers taking Rob Lucci in any way seriously, especially when Luffy comes to the conclusion that it is in fact the pigeon controlling Rob Lucci and not the other way around. So he's strong and helpful, but Lucci is very much painted as a gag character, a quirk typecast. And also any potential ominous vibes about him are masked by the internal conflict within the Straw Hats. There is so much going on during Water 7 with our focus on Robin, Usopp, and Frankie that Rob Lucci and the rest of CP9 masterfully weave their way into the story, and by the time that we even begin to suspect them, it is far too late. And there's also something extra special that needs to be added here, something that only really comes across in the anime. But when Robin is speaking to that CP9 member in the shadows, we just hear Lucci's natural voice. However, because he's been pretending to be a high-pitched pigeon, you can't even recognize it's his real voice. It's really well thought out, and it makes me want to see more mystery-style storytelling from Oda. Although I will say that there is one flaw with Oda's implementation of Rob Lucci as a super secret agent, and that flaw is that aside from Water 7, Rob Lucci and CP9 seem to be practically world famous. When Rob Lucci goes on his Bond villain monologue to Iceberg about the inner workings of Cypherpol, he states that CP9 is a secret cell that cannot operate in the open because it's not supposed to exist. It's a secret, don't tell anyone, shh. And this is skipping ahead a bit, but when Rob Lucci returns to Enies Lobby, he's greeted like a celebrity. In fact, everywhere he goes, he's a celebrity. Every Marine and world government agent knows exactly who he is. Even the waitress that Jabra was dating named Catherine dumped Jabra because she heard that Rob Lucci was coming back to Enies Lobby, and she wanted to try her luck with him instead. There's also a part during Thriller Bark where Gekko Moria and Bartholomew Kuma are talking about the Enies Lobby incident, with Kuma saying, and I quote, "Before the incident at Enies Lobby, no one thought that Rob Lucci could lose." Whereas the line should have been something more like, "Before the incident at Enies Lobby, no one knew that Rob Lucci even existed, because he's a secret agent man who infiltrated Water 7 using his real name, even though he is known by every fodder Marine and world government agent in existence." And after Luffy defeats Lucci, there's even a broadcast over what remains of Post-Enies Lobby that Rob Lucci was beaten. And all of the Marines are in shock because they all know who he is. So I really do think that Oda dropped the ball a bit with the secret agent stuff after the reveal, but if he was to drop the ball, then that would be the time to do it. It still doesn't impact the reveal itself. And Lucci is a villain who has more or less managed to retain his initial air of mystery because over the course of One Piece, we don't actually learn a whole lot about him. In total, Rob Lucci's backstory amounts to about 5 panels. It's a chilling tale of a pirate crew having taken a kingdom soldier's hostage, and when Lucci was sent in to settle the situation, he infiltrated and killed all of the hostages before doing the same to the attacking pirates. So this flashback tends to confuse a lot of people, especially in the anime where the events are extended and portrayed in a bit weirdly. I'm not a huge fan of how they did it. But the reason why Lucci killed the hostages was because if these soldiers were weak enough to expose the country, then simply dealing with the pirates wasn't going to be good enough, as those same soldiers would just go on to compromise the kingdom again. Rob Lucci is a man who believes that weakness is a sin. In his eyes, these soldiers were every bit as guilty of not fulfilling their duties as the pirates were of attacking the kingdom to begin with. This is a philosophy that Rob Lucci has labeled dark justice, which is Lucci's personal brand of justice that involves finding a balance between the most horrific yet still logical solution to any problem. With something like absolute justice, Sakazuki will do terrible things that he sees as necessary for the greater good. He will not seek those things out though. Whereas with dark justice, Rob Lucci will deliberately seek out those terrible things that can result in justice. It's basically his excuse for being able to do horrible things. And Lucci is definitely one of the most stoic characters in One Piece. His ability to express any emotion is so limited that I'm convinced he's using Iron Body on his face at all times to keep everything perfectly frozen in a constant state of neutrality. And you know, in another saga, I'm not sure if a primary antagonist like Lucci would have landed, because Lucci is very dry and we learn incredibly little about him. However, it works for Water 7 and Enies Lobby because Lucci's role is bigger than any individual goal. Rob Lucci is a physical manifestation of the world government. He is there to serve as that unbreakable wall that the Straw Hats cannot overcome. And the metaphor is that trying to fight Rob Lucci is like trying to fight the entirety of the world government itself. It is just impossible. More so than most, this is an arc where the Straw Hats are fighting against the system. And systems are emotionless and ruthless. They do what they're programmed to do. There is no emotional input. Like how when Caliphate stated that their long mission was nearly complete and Lucci simply replied, "Keep careless comments like that to yourself until we arrive." And one of the reasons why I personally really love Lucci is because Oda really commits to his no-nonsense persona. And really, the only occasion of nonsense that I can recall is Lucci being caught out underestimating Luffy's strength, after which point Lucci immediately recognized his own fault and adjusted. At one point, he even complimented Luffy and stated that he was worthy of being a captain, which was really refreshing to see, as most villains have a complete inability to self-reflect and often delegate their own shortcomings to other factors. Not Rob Lucci though. This man is a nigh-on flawless iron wall. You cannot crack him emotionally, and you cannot wait for him to make a mistake because he won't. And so the only way that you can deal with Lucci is to be strong enough to break down that iron wall, which is why Luffy versus Lucci is one of the most memorable fights in One Piece. It is a non-stop brutal slugfest that pushed Luffy harder than any other opponent, and even to this day, the only fight that can really rival it is Luffy versus Katakuri. And watching Luffy deliver that final jet Gatling gun that broke the big cat wall is still one of my fondest memories of One Piece of all time. But another reason why Lucci works here is because the emotional core of the Water 7 saga is about the Straw Hats. They have more than enough drama happening within their own crew that we can afford to balance all of that out with such an emotionless villain. But then there's also Spandam. I mentioned this in his video, but Spandam and Lucci are dual antagonists. What Lucci lacks in out loud personality, Spandam eagerly fills like a teenager into a sock. And what Spandam lacks in the threat of raw power, Lucci expertly serves up on the corpse of his enemy. There's even a great moment where you see the true contrast between Lucci and Spandam, which is when Lucci refuses to toast the success of their 5-year mission. I'm not interested in status or power. The world government decides justice for us. As long as the government recognizes you as the leader of CP9, we will carry out your orders to the letter, but we don't have to agree with your ideals. Which contrasts against Spandam because all he cares about is status and power, and also dictating justice according to his own ideals. But Spandam then asks what Lucci does want, and the reply is quite chilling. Blood. When we're here, murder is justified. And Oda even draws Lucci having transformed into his carnivorous Zoan form, which were previously stated stated to be subject to heightened primal instincts, bloodlust in particular. And I find it really interesting that Rob Lucci's only tangible desire in this world probably comes as a direct result of consuming his devil fruit. He wants to kill because that carnivorous zoan instinct is always there driving him to that outcome. Although Rob Lucci does also have, a slight hint of sadism about him, which is displayed on the very first occasion that he actually smiled, which was when he was encouraging Kaku and Califer to eat their unknown devil fruits. Lucci just sits there and says, "Eat them, it'll be fun." Rob Lucci used the word fun. There is no other point in One Piece where the concept of fun would be even remotely applicable to him. But the thought of two people cursing themselves with unknown powers and contorting their bodies into God knows what is incredibly exciting to him. And when it comes down to it, Rob Lucci isn't too dissimilar from an animal in a zoo. He's happy so long as he gets fed. He might not agree ideologically with his zookeepers, but as long as they keep the red meat coming, it's not an issue. Which I will say is very odd for One Piece, given how much it focuses on the importance of willpower, no matter which side you're on. On paper, Lucci has the lowest willpower of any major antagonist. He has no real personal drive. He's endlessly loyal to the world government. He doesn't even care what they tell him to do. That's just justice. If they ask him to jump, he says how high. If they ask him to bake a cake, he says, what flavor? And if they ask him to whip out his in the jungle and that poison dart frog, then he says, that's just the kind of man that Rob Lucci is. He lets them decide everything for him. And yet he's still able to properly challenge and on a good day beat Monkey D. Luffy, the most driven, will-focused being in existence. So how is Rob Lucci this damn strong? Well, it's because the system isn't manipulating him. Rob Lucci is manipulating the system, which I think was brilliantly observed when Lucci revealed that Chimney and Gonbei had been following them. And when Spandam asked why Lucci didn't get rid of them, he replied, "You didn't give me the order," which was accompanied by his second smile in the series. Commanding Rob Lucci is like making a deal with the devil. He will carry out exactly what you ask him to the letter, but you need to be extremely careful with your requests, because if you give him even the tiniest loophole, then he is going to take that and exploit it in the worst possible way for you. Although Rob Lucci does come with a sliver of character growth over time. Following the Enies Lobby incident, CP9 escaped the island, and Rob Lucci, he is not in good shape at all, and in order to pay for his medical bills, the rest of the agents take up odd jobs in a town named St. Poplar. The agents do this because, as it turns out, they've all known each other since childhood. CP9 agents are taken to a secret training island from a very young age. And after Lucci's recovery, they show their thanks to the town by beating up some pirates who had attacked them. And this is where we see the aforementioned character development, because this same event happened in Rob Lucci's flashback, the one where he punished the kingdom for being weak enough to allow the pirates to attack. However, in this case, his motto of dark justice was switched to excessive justice, and Lucci only attacked the pirates, sparing the town, despite the fact that they were weak. And I think that this is because Lucci had to really reckon with his own philosophy after losing to Luffy. Because if he lost to Luffy, then that means that Lucci himself was weak. And according to his dark justice, he shouldn't even be worthy of living right now, because Lucci himself was weak enough to allow the Enies Lobby incident to happen. And while this is yet to be shown in any media, Oda has said that Lucci and the CP9 agents then went on to foil a plot to undermine the world government by Spandam's father Spandine, and that's how they were not only reinstated, but even promoted to CP0 agents. And for most of post-time skip, Lucci has been doing what Lucci does best. He's been ever present, but mostly hiding from us as readers. Lucci was aware of what was happening on Punk Hazard as he was watching Caesar's broadcast, and he actually made an appearance on Dressrosa at the end of that arc, before making himself properly known at the Reverie, which was a really fun time because Rob Lucci appeared every 10 volumes on the dot. Volume 70 for Punk Hazard, Volume 80 for Dressrosa, and then Volume 90 for the Reverie. Although sadly, the streak ended there. Because Lucci did appear during Wano, but unfortunately it was volume 102. It was a bit late there. He also made a ton of appearances in One Piece films, starting with film Gold, then Stampede, and was also featured in film Red, which actually makes him one of the most featured One Piece movie characters aside from the Straw Hats. And these are tiny appearances, but what they did right is they kept Rob Lucci remaining in the background of the story. He was continuing to be relevant. We didn't know what he was doing, but it wasn't good. And eventually we saw this not good as he reappeared as a minor antagonist during the Egghead Island arc. And the one thing I've come to really respect about Rob Lucci is that even after being beaten by Luffy, he wasn't broken. Most villains have their wills and dreams shattered by Luffy, but Lucci never lost focus. Instead, he became even stronger and worked his way up to a rematch with Luffy. And rematches in One Piece before this point were practically unprecedented. After being beaten by Luffy, no one challenges him again, except for Lucci. And Bellamy, I guess, but and I think this very strongly reflects Lucci's symbolism of the system. Yes, Rob Lucci was beaten, but the world government definitely was not. And as long as this system stands, so will he. And not only that, he'll get even stronger, now having awakened his devil fruit. However, 2 years on, Rob Lucci has become a bit more blatant about his interpretation of his orders, as he was clearly instructed not to attack Luffy due to him being an Emperor of the Sea, and Lucci's less than creative way of getting around this was to state that he doesn't consider Luffy to be an Emperor of the Sea. So it's definitely not his best work, but that's because Rob Lucci in this arc needed to reassert himself. This isn't mentioned very often, but Lucci had a Katakuri-esque legend around him. Within the Marines, he was known as a man who could not be defeated, and I think that Lucci himself definitely bought into that to some degree, which seems like a bit of a joke now because he wasn't even a Haki user pre-time skip, but that's how he was set up. He was the OG beta test for Katakuri. So on Egghead Island, Lucci now had the chance to defeat the only person who had ever beaten him, and in essence reclaim his perfect record. Which also means that for the first time we're aware of, Lucci fought for something other than bloodlust. There's a sense of pride on the line here, a drive to do better, a drive that led him to awakening his devil fruit. If anything, Luffy has brought out the best in Lucci by delivering that first taste of humility. And Lucci would of course be served 2 more courses during Egghead Island, as he was very much out of his league in the Luffy rematch, and his main conflict on the island ended up being against Zoro, who defeated Lucci with what I would describe as an uncomfortable degree of ease. As it's portrayed in the manga, the moment that Zoro got serious, Lucci was finished. Zoro didn't even whip out the bandana for this occasion. That's how unserious he was. Which is terrifying because I can only imagine how much more powerful this is going to make Lucci in the future. As we've explored, despite his willingness to obey, he's not the kind of man whose will can be broken. He's not going to retire and open up a cafe like previous One Piece villains. No, he's going to take these 2 losses and compound them into an even more ferocious opponent to deal with in the future. But there is one more very important thing to note about Lucci. When he was questioned by Marcus Mars, Lucci made a plea to spare Kaku's life, which is the first time that Rob Lucci has ever shown what I would describe as a typical human emotion. He was concerned for his friend, and it shows that he's found meaning in something other than bloodlust. I don't know how much meaning, but this simple request is such a huge step forward for Lucci. Which brings us to the current day and Rob Lucci's placement on this list. Although I still feel like Lucci has a lot left to offer us in the future. I often feel like if I examine Rob Lucci alone in comparison to other top tier One Piece villains, he ends up feeling a bit lacking, but the context of Lucci's tenure really matters. And within that context of the Water 7 saga, Rob Lucci is simply perfect. I don't know what more I would have wanted from someone in his position. And anything that is lacking is balanced out by Spandam. And you really get the same sort of vibe on Egghead Island. Rob Lucci was there, but he didn't have the presence of Saint Saturn or Kizaru, completely different weight classes, and yet he still did his job as a villain immaculately. And apart from the not so secret agent thing, which is mostly just funny, I struggle to find any flaws with Rob Lucci and his unbelievably impactful and persistent role as a villain in the story. And as such, he is going to be our 3rd S tier villain on this list. And you let me know in the comments who you'd like to see ranked next.